everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Divelsa Gonzalez Flores, and I am the Family Engagement Specialist here at DC Public Schools. And today we have a very exciting session with our friends at the National Institute of Mental Health. And today we'll be talking about worry and anxiety in children and adolescents and what we can do to support. But before I continue, I want to make sure that...
Thank you so much for having us again. My name is Kayleen DeHaut. I'm a social worker at the National Institute of Mental Health, and we are part of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And our mission really is to transform the understanding and treatment of mental illnesses through basic and clinical research. So we're really feel honored to be here today. So I'm privileged to introduce our speaker, Dr. Erin Berman. And Dr. Berman is a clinical psychologist with us at the National Institute of Mental Health. And she received her clinical psychology doctoral degree from the Chicago Medical School. And her clinical training continued with attending the Boston Consortium of Clinical Psychology, where she was a Harvard Medical School fellowship recipient. And she completed her postdoctoral respecialization in child and adolescent anxiety disorders at Temple in Philadelphia. And her main area of interest continues to be cognitive behavioral interventions with children, adolescents, and adults with anxiety disorders. So I'm really privileged to introduce Dr. Erin Berman. Pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kayleen, and thank you, DCPS, for having us here. It really is, an honor and a privilege. We are located in Bethesda, Maryland, which is not very far from DC, but it is with traffic. So we are a resource. We're a federally funded resource that we want to, be able to provide the information we have and also hear your questions and comments to improve how we can serve the community, and most importantly, near and dear to my heart. I've been working with children and families for now over 15 years, and being able to have us be accessible to you for any questions or thoughts, or any way we can help in the issues of mental health and specifically anxiety disorders. So why I have just a million different pictures is my first take-home message is anxiety, and specifically stress, does look different in every individual. Some children are very verbal about it and will tell you, I'm feeling stressed, I'm anxious, I'm nervous. Some will more hide in the corner in the room, not be able to express it as much. Some individuals express it in art or reading or with their friends. So most important, we understand that there is no cookie cutter, visual or words we're looking for. But a lot of times I'll give you a little bit of the highlights in this presentation of what might be key aspects that we all may experience when we're having excessive stress and anxiety. Because we're a research institution, and I really enjoy explaining anxiety through the lens of science, because it really is our first step to helping kids and parents, is to normalize it. To let everyone understand that most of us feel anxious at some point in our lives, and many of us feel anxious at all different points of our lives. And in the context of children and adolescents, that they're different than us. I think we all know that, we can see that visually, but it's sometimes hard to remember what we were like, or what we could and couldn't do at younger ages, middle school, high school, or even college. So the front of our brain is the last part to develop. And what's interesting is this image below shows how planning, prioritizing, controlling impulses, and rational thinking are all kind of the last to develop. What now research has shown is usually in females, they're more developed by the ages of 18 to 23, and males many times not until their mid-20s. So these are all things, being able to plan, being able to control our impulses, and to have rational thoughts. We need these to cope with stress and anxiety. And so to know that just in this context, we can start to cultivate these skills at a younger age in kids, but we need to be more explicit about it. So again, what I take from this slide is that we want to normalize and let kids know you can't control all your impulse, you can't control your thinking, but we're going to teach you strategies how to kind of do that and improve how you respond to anxiety, because we can't get rid of it all the way. Then we have COVID, which we cannot ignore that this had an immense impact on children, adolescents, and adults' mental health, all of us. Physical distancing had a extreme impact on senses of isolation and coping. Kids usually hang out with friends to relieve stress. Adults do as well. So to realize that that has been lost and how we can gain a little bit more footing with that, and realize that may impact a child's vulnerability to being more anxious or stressed currently. Insert the lack of normal outlets, the thing we love to do, sports, music events, picnics, barbecues, dances, birthday parties, right? Then a lot of parents were working from home and managing children of all different ages, and making those hard decisions definitely added to the stress on the family in general. Insert salary loss, job loss, and the immense burden. We know that there was a differential impact on minority communities. So all of that will only, I guess, exacerbate the levels of anxiety and stress that are already within us. And COVID didn't help the situation, but hopefully by identifying what are the things that we lost, that we can actually start to cultivate the things that, back into our lives to help reduce anxiety and stress. So we all normalize again how many people are experiencing stress and anxiety. More recent data has suggested that 1 in 4 kids had depressive symptoms and have had an increased prevalence. So there's been more depression and anxiety that we've seen in general in this population. Also, 1 in 5 kids also experience an increase in elevated anxiety symptoms. So knowing that it's important to look out for these, and that they are going to be emerging even at a higher rate than they were prior to the pandemic. Also, to honor all of you who made it through this very, intense pandemic, and that will continue to have to change and modify our behaviors to deal with things. So as we saw in the data for adults, during late June, 40% of adults reported struggling with some mental health or substance use disorders. So it was very common for many adults to be stressed out, in particularly anxiety and depression sat at about 31% of the population. Trauma and stress, which makes sense with the immense loss that many families had due to COVID, whether it was close relatives or financial losses. That was a good portion. We also have 13% had an increase in substance use. Was not an uncommon thing, and not an uncommon way for many individuals to cope with such a stressful situation. And also obviously having an increase in thoughts of suicide or suicidal type behaviors. So just so we all know, if any of us have had these feelings as an adult as well, it was not uncommon for this pandemic to create an uptick. So how do we help our kids? We know the root of anxiety is many times in uncertainty, right? This pandemic really put a spotlight on that. We weren't sure how it was going to end, not end, how it's going to impact our lives. So what can we do? These are really good skills that all of us as adults, and specifically parents, we want to help. We want to cultivate all of these skills, but they're ones we don't always realize that kids need to actually explicitly cultivate. So help your kid, if they're nervous or anxious about something, focus on what you can control. So specifically in the context of the pandemic, there were many things we couldn't control, but we could control maybe certain aspects of our daily life or how we looked at certain situations. It's natural to have some level of fear or anxiety. As I spoke a couple slides prior to this, letting individuals know that it's normal, making sure people understand that it's common. Many times when I just speak to a kid for the first time, or they read a book about anxiety, that can help take their anxiety down, knowing that other people experience this as well. Focus on other aspects of your life that you find interesting or engaging. The pandemic many times gave people tunnel vision and knowing that there's a broader spectrum of things that we can focus on. It doesn't have to just be friends and sports. It could be school, reading, and immediate family. Turn off the news and social media. This is more for either the older kids or for us adults, because it doesn't generally, to overload us doesn't help us in general. And practice acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean we like a situation or we're okay with a situation. But knowing what's in front of us, what we have control over and what we don't, then we can more likely problem solve better. And I'm going to talk a lot about problem solving and how that's not part and natural to the frontal lobes of kids, adolescents, and some adults, and that this is something we can help cultivate as parents in our children and adolescents. So we really want to take a stance of more of a coach than an expert. We don't know what's all in their heads. I never pretend to know what's in all the heads of all of my patients. Although I've spent many times with many different ones, it's still everyone's different. So we are more a coach versus an expert, or even a coach more than a teacher, right? So what can we do, even if we have little ones that don't want to talk about it, but we may think that they're anxious? We can model. We can show them, how do we deal with anxious or scary situations? So I'll give a really light one, but I don't love spiders. When I see a spider, the worst thing I could do is scream and run away. Well, that's normal response, very normal response, right? But what would be helpful for me to do is when my kids are next to me, go, Mommy's not feeling super great about this spider. It's a little scary. What can I do? Do you see? So acknowledging my feelings, pretending they don't exist is not helpful. And then figuring out what I can do. Well, I'll go get that shoe and smash it. No, don't worry. I am learning to take good care of them and put them in a tissue, but it's taken a lot of self-control recently. So it's one way to help kids feel more comfortable either talking about their emotions or also learning how to deal with them. What else can we do? Social belonging is very important for children and adolescents, and that is something that was taken away to some extent with distance learning and many aspects of the pandemic. We had no control over, and we cannot be upset or angry in that respect, but how else can we cultivate it? If we can't cultivate it because we have a loved one who's immunocompromised, then maybe we can do Zoom or video chats or masks outside, but figuring out how you can cultivate it in the context of your family. Provide positive peer support transfer. So find or have your kid find that friend or aunt or uncle, or depending on their age, or even, cousin that might be able to help them talk it out, what's making them nervous. So encouraging connections in many different ways is a very helpful way of dealing with anxiety and stress. And boundaries modeling, which is very hard, and specifically became harder in the pandemic because we were all trying to wear a lot of different hats and doing all different types of things. But having our kids know when we can say no and when are time to ask for help from either teachers or professionals or our parents or grandparents. So I think a lot of people have the question when they come to these seminars of when is anxiety problematic, or as we say, a disorder. And it's really these 4 things that I look for, and you can look for as a parent or caregiver or teacher. When there's avoidance to something that is very, very important for the kid to need to attend or want to attend. So for school, when there's avoidance to specific things that are school related, we do all need to go to school. And so that would be a place that it would be important. Now, some kids are afraid of roller coasters. Well, you can avoid an amusement park and live. So that one, not as much, but avoidance of something important to them. So maybe they love soccer, but all of a sudden something there makes them nervous, whether their performance or they don't know anyone. So when they're staying away from something to an excessive amount that interferes in something they love or need to do. Interference, again, kind of when we need or we want to do something and we can't. Or interference, a lot of parents will give me the example of sleep. It's interfering in their ability to the parents to fall asleep. Many times when you have children with separation anxiety disorder, or the kid themselves fall asleep in a comfortable, early, on time manner. So when it's something that's really blocking what we need to do on a daily basis. Distress, this is the common one when we see kids come to us, is they are maybe throwing a fit, crying a lot, frozen a lot, throwing tantrums. Really remember, anxiety is flight, fight, or freeze. You may see a child getting very irritable and it may be anxiety, very sad and be anxious, or just frozen and unable to explain what's bothering them the most. And transient versus persistent. At the beginning of a school year or a trauma, those things, anything, tough things happening in life or big changes, it's okay if we're seeing some of these symptoms. But if it's going on for about more than a few months and it's interfering or stopping them from doing something they need to be doing immediately, then I'm raise a little bit more red flags that we need to take care of what's going on, and it might be in a level that it might need extra help. So signs, typical signs that we'll see, or that'll first kind of signal that your child or adolescent is experiencing some level of excessive anxiety. Worry before and after events. So they're thinking about things before they happen, while they're happening, after they're happening. You may hear them talk to you about that, or you may see them really asking a lot of questions. That's another thing. And questions that are not productive. Questions that keep leading them in circles. As I mentioned, irritability and anger can also be a common sign of anxiety or depression in kids. Specifically, we do know anger and irritability is sometimes a symptom of depression or anxiety, and more likely sometimes males versus females. Problems sleeping. Again, this seems to be one that I see a lot of individuals come with us to help because they're not sleeping well. And problem sleeping maybe they fall asleep okay, but they get up in the middle of the night or they get up early. So being aware that that can be a sign of anxiety. Problems being alone in spaces that they used to be alone in or they need to be alone in. Not liking to be the center of attention, not in terms of dancing or singing performance, but if they have to raise their hand in class or give a presentation. Those can be situations that we're alluding to that could be problematic. Seeing panic symptoms, panic feelings, just when an individual doesn't feel great. Freezing can be a sign of panic. Butterflies in their stomach. Kids will talk about stomach aches, headaches, some physical symptoms. Those may be a sign of anxiety. Fight or flight response and problems concentrating. And there's many more. Again, it depends on the child, but these are the common ones we will see. And usually that may be our first signal, as I was saying, physical symptoms that are maybe an indication of anxiety. So stomach aches, headaches, complaining about them some days and not others. So many times I'll have parents look for a pattern. Is there a pattern to when they're nervous or anxious? Are they only getting headaches before they go to school, or stomach aches before they go to school, or before they go to soccer practice? Starting to look for those things. They're typical, normal symptoms of anxiety, and they're legitimate. Their stomach is hurting, their head is hurting. This image that you can't see super great in this picture, but if you Google the anatomy of fear, you can find it online, is showing that really certain parts of our brain turn on when we're anxious, whether we're being, to be dramatic, chased by a bear, or whether we are taking a test. We still may have the same physical symptoms. So stomach ache, headaches, nausea, feeling nervous, feeling like they want to get sick or throw up. Frequent trips to the bathroom, having the urge to pee or go to the bathroom is a typical sign of anxiety. Some kids will complain of tightness or pain in the chest. Sweating, dizziness, lightheadedness, heart racing, feeling cold, feeling extra hot. There's a million symptoms, and it's different for each child, but these are the typical ones that you would see. When they happen, we'll talk about that in the next slide. It's really important, though, to validate for your kid that these are real and they're not making it up. And of course, if they're happening chronically, always going to your pediatrician to getting them checked out to see if there's anything else underlying can be very helpful too. So what do we do when we have panic attack, a child freaking out in front of us, a stressful event, really very intense crying, any of the physical intense symptoms. The first thing is, as us all good fixers, as parents and caregivers and aunts and uncles and teachers, remember, you can't stop it. Okay. When things get really upset and people get really overwhelmed, we can't stop it. Okay. But we can cope. So again, this is not dire. We're not saying you can't, get over things, but remember, you can't stop it. Help them understand that you're listening. Even if it's overwhelming for you, try your best. If you're not in your best space, go grab whoever's in the next room and maybe they can listen to the kid. Don't talk a lot while someone's so upset. They're not listening. Remember, this is fight, flight, or freeze. We are in survival mode. It is not time to talk. Be a calming influence. So what can you do? Let's go outside. Can I rub your back? Can I talk to you? Do you want to listen to music? Remind them that this ends. You feel really bad right now, but I can promise you, you can tell them that it will end. No one's anxiety can stay up here forever. Now, does it ebb and flow? Of course, but it can't stay up here forever. And grounding is a great technique. I'm putting this out there. Google it, find some different references for it, anywhere that you might read about it. Essentially, it's enacting your 5 senses, one of them or all of them, to help you bring yourself back to your body, right? So we're doing something more physical because that's how we're going to compete against a physical symptom, right? Talking is great. You probably are saying brilliant things, but many times people aren't listening. So grounding can be having a cold glass of water, holding an ice cube, going out to feel fresh air. It's nice and cold out today in DC. So those kind of things. Just to give you a quick tip on how to kind of push through these overwhelming feelings when they're kicking in. Walk with your anxiety. So this is many times my patients don't want to hear this part. And I don't either sometimes when I get anxious or stressed. So it's very normal. But we can't get rid of anxiety completely. We wouldn't want to. It wouldn't help us prepare for a test or a presentation or get out of the house on time for certain people. So really making sure your kid knows, hey, it's okay that you're feeling anxious, that you're feeling stressed. And one way to do it if you feel comfortable is if you feel comfortable self-disclosing. When's the time you felt nervous or anxious, and what do you do? So we want to walk with our anxiety. We want to cope with it versus fighting against it. And when we feel bad, no one wants to keep feeling this way, or no one wants a little kid or even a teenager to be feeling this way. We kind of have to fight our gut to fix. And we have to think in a calm time, what are the things we can do to cope when these things are happening? It can be a big or small brain glitch. This is, again, part of the process that I want you to take of normalizing it for your kids, right? There are many reasons you may be feeling anxious, and listening to them why can help us problem solve the answers. So these are some reasons why, right? And some places we could problem solve. I got this kind of analogy when I was spending so much time at home with my daughter on remote learning. And she kept saying, it's glitching, it's glitching. They would yell at the teachers in a very fun way, and there are many reasons why things glitch, why we have a hard time, focusing or paying attention in a moment. One is our bandwidth, right? Do we have the energy? And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but are we taking care of our basic needs, or are they taken care of? And if they're not, it's very hard many times to cope with stress or anxiety. And those things could be sleep, eating, stress reduction, connection, right? It's very important for us to be connected with individuals, whether it's our primary caregiver, whether it's a trusted teacher, whether it's a school nurse. That's what I really want us to all think creatively about. Doesn't have to be one person, doesn't have to be a therapist or a teacher. It can be, that's a great option. But who are we connected with? And the more connections we have, the stronger connections we have, many times we can cope with these brain glitches a little bit better. And our speed, essentially speed's the wrong one, but we want to try and slow ourselves down when these brain glitches are coming on. That's the opposite, I know, of the analogy. Like, we want a bigger, faster speed when we have more things, the internet, but you can tell I'm not a complete techie individual. So yes, what can we do to slow ourselves down or improve our kind of endurance, I guess, in dealing with these things? We don't, when we have one of these anxiety moments, we don't want to freak out and say, I don't want it. Well, we can say we don't want it, but how are we going to slow ourselves down and cope with it? So this was terribly important during the pandemic and also very, very hard to do. These things also are very hard to do many times due to different variables, depending on the family, depending on their situation. But look at these kind of every day and assess them, because maybe the anxiety is a product of not having some of these met and not necessarily something you have to go do in-depth therapy for. So what's the sleep cycle look like for the individuals that's feeling extra stressed? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they getting too much or too little? We do know with depression, actually, it can be a symptom of depression if we have too much sleep or too little sleep. So how does it look? Are we getting a full night? And is it not broken? I do recommend one of the first places to go if your child is having sleep issues is going to your pediatrician. They can be very helpful in just coming up with little strategies or ways to cope initially. Exercise, which again was very challenging to kind of implement many times during the pandemic, right? Are we walking, taking a walk, going on a bike ride, running? Exercise is terribly, terribly important when it comes to managing anxiety. There's been plenty of studies to suggest that doing daily exercise or even every other day exercise can really reduce our general level of anxiety. And with kids, it's even more important to get them out and about and kind of release that nervous energy. Time alone. This doesn't have to be everyone, but some kids after a day of school don't need an activity or an engaging with a friend. They need to be alone to decompress. Are we okay? And if we need to, checking in that we're having that time every day or every other day if it's not possible. Being outside is, again, really restorative. People enjoy being outside. And it kind of is back to that sense of grounding that you heard me mention a few slides back. How can we ground ourselves when we're feeling nervous, anxious, or stressed? Eating's great. Are we eating healthy or not even that much in that? Doesn't have to be like specifically very intense healthy eating, but what we really need is, are we doing it throughout the day? I can't tell you how many kids will come to my session maybe midday and I'll ask, what did you eat today? Oh, like maybe half an apple this morning. That's not going to allow you to fight any level of anxiety or also help you at school. And we haven't really even gotten into that in detail, but many times concentration issues, difficulty at school can be related to sleep and eating. And then a child's anxious because they're unable to concentrate, but that may be some of the core that we need to address first versus other strategies. And social connections. Again, social connections are however it works for the child though, right? If they just like playing, soccer with their next door neighbor in the park, that's more than enough. They don't need to be a social butterfly. Or if they want to have 50 kids over, I guess that's too many, but making it fit to the child is most important. Whatever they find is an important social connection is good to identify to help. Change the way, as I mentioned, the way you relate to your kids' anxiety. It's very normal, very, very normal as an adult, specifically a caregiver, to want to fix and jump in and give the solution. We really want to start them to pull it out of them. So having them mess up and learn, not mess up immensely, but maybe not do so well on a quiz or test, or maybe forget their lunch at school. What's interesting is when these things happen, there's a lot of people around them that, one, can help problem solve, and two, having them learn that, look, I can cope. Anxiety makes us feel like we can't cope with what's going on. However, most people have it in themselves that they can. So you can always play a silly game with a kid or even adolescent. What's the problem I have? Oh, the problem is I keep forgetting my lunch. What could I do? What are all the solutions? And have them come up with even ridiculous ones. Okay, let me think. I forget my lunch every day. I could just not eat lunch. I could ask a friend for their lunch. I could talk to my teacher. I could set it out the night before. What I mean is help them come up with a million solutions and find the best one from that for them. And help them identify who they can go if you're not around, right? Even if it's just that one, like I said, the nurse in the nurse's office, if that's who they feel comfortable talking to, that's a great person to identify. Supporting a new mindset for kids. Lots of anxious kids are very overwhelmed, very self-critical. They kind of have tunnel vision. They're only able to see that the things they're not doing right, or they're only able to see the bad things that can happen in the future. We want to help them understand that it's okay to fail. It's okay if we are not doing the things we want to do in the moment. It's okay if we don't know what's going to happen in the future. This is very tough stuff, but having you know that this is what you need to cultivate in your kids can help reduce their anxiety. Experience, I love this quote, is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. Normalizing mistakes can be terribly helpful for anxious kids. How do we approach strong emotions? And I know I've kind of already said this before, but it's a big one that I get from a lot of parents. What do I do if I have a child who's terrified, who's socially anxious, who's nervous to go say hi to that kid, or nervous to give that presentation in front of the class, or nervous to ask the teacher for help? How do I approach it? Really listen hard. They may have a worry that you didn't even think of. Maybe they're worried that the teacher won't want to help them. Okay. Hopefully you have some knowledge about the teacher, and if they're generally a kind person, you can help them think it through a little bit better. So help them express exactly what they're feeling. Listen. Role play social situations. So this one, again, I'm kind of focusing on kids with social anxiety. And if you're a caregiver that doesn't have that, you don't understand, maybe sometimes even basic things are frozen or feel overwhelming. So even just practicing it. So I had one kid who just didn't know if they forgot their lunch, what to say. And so I had the parents practice at home. Okay, you go up to the teacher. I'll be the teacher. You'll be yourself. Or you can switch it. And sometimes that's fun for the kid. You can be the kid and they can be the teacher. And helping them role play and get some practice many times can reduce the general level of anxiety that they're feeling. And they feel they have some mastery. And the last thing, which I mentioned before too, it never hurts to help engage the schools. Specifically, if there's individuals you trust or feel comfortable with, having them know that, or if they're an adolescent, a teen, and there is a trusted friend, okay, you're nervous about going to lunch and not having anybody there. Can you bring your friend to the lunch table and they can maybe be a good buffer for you? Can you go to the other teachers that might be a good buffer to you? And again, having them understand that this is in difficult situations, not all. And what do we do? How do we approach this in a balanced way? So by now, there's kind of a theme in working with anxiety and stress. We want balance because anxiety makes us feel like the world is either good or bad, or terrible or wonderful. And those polar sides, we want to really kind of get to a balance. So what do we do? And what's kind of the crux of what we do as caregivers? Be sensitive. Again, even if we can't relate, maybe my husband can't relate to a fear of spiders, but hopefully he doesn't look at me and laugh. Okay, so be sensitive. Educate. All of you are here doing this and listening and trying to get some background on how to work with anxiety. Perfect. Trying to figure that out. Giving positive feedback. Again, anxiety makes us only focus a lot on the negative. So even if you can find the smallest things that someone did right that day or that you saw was a good step, that's important. Be calm. If you can't be calm in a situation, that's okay. You're human. Find someone else who can. I say that jokingly, but it's kind of true. Like, be calm. And if you have to, take care of yourself first and then go handle the situation. Be consistent. So whatever you decide you want to push your child in doing, and again, we're pushing them in things that they need to do on a daily basis, and want to do, like say hi to a friend, or, For me, even sometimes my kids find some of this adults at school intimidating. So I say, when we see your teacher or we see the assistant principal, I want you to say hi. I don't badger them about it, but being consistent that this is something that's good practice for them. And focus, like we said, a lot on problem solving skills. What can we do when there's mistakes or bad things that have happened? Don't, as a caregiver, accommodate too much, okay? Don't let them avoid too much. So many times anxious kids will give lots of, for lack of a better word, excuses. They're not really excuses. They're feeling overwhelmed and they don't know how to get out of things. I don't want to do soccer anymore because it's boring. Oh, I don't need to talk to this teacher because they're mean. Listen for those subtle excuses that are a change in what they used to do. And realize that maybe I need to push them here. Don't single the child out or ridicule. I made the example of like my husband laughing at me with the spider. Now I'm an adult, so it's kind of fine and funny, but just kids are very kind of aware of this. Excessive reassurance. So one hard thing to do as a loving caregiver is to not tell your child it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. Because sometimes it's not going to be okay. And we need to not reassure them too much. We want to give them the skills of when it's not okay, what they can do. And again, being too directive, taking over, solving all their problems when we want to cultivate that problem solving skills in them as well. So how do we want to approach anxiety? This is one lovely slide that just kind of gives you hopefully a summary of how to approach it, even when we're feeling super nervous ourselves. To our kid or even ourselves, you're brave, you're resourceful, you're a thinker. You have everything you need inside you to cope with things brilliantly. Don't let your mind tell you that you can't do hard things, because you absolutely can. Again, with anxiety, when it becomes excessive, we want to support versus protect, because we can't protect our kids from everything. We can't. And if we do, we're doing them a bit of a disservice because they're not really learning how to cope with situations that they need to learn to. So what do? We want to be really empathetic. Like we said, they simply could be saying hi to a friend or forgetting what to do if you forget your lunchbox. Just understand that, I get it. That's hard for you, being empathetic. Acceptance. So trying not to get too upset that this might be the stress that your child's dealing with. Of course, you'll get upset. That's normal to have some feelings, but try your best to accept what it is. And then let's see where we can go from there. Confidence in them. I have faith in you. You can do this. Another good question that you can ask if you're trying to tap into what they're thinking with a child who has a hard time identifying what they're thinking, big, good, open-ended questions can be very helpful. What's going on in your head? What are you thinking about right now? And just instead of you saying, are you thinking about this? Are you thinking about that? I mean, if you do know, go for it. That's not what I'm saying. But if it's something where you're not quite sure and you need to pull it out, take your time, be patient. Maybe when they come home from school that day, they won't be able to, but the next morning they might be able to talk to you about it. As we talked about over and over again, you're going to be tired of them. Skills and problem solving. As we said, being consistent and pushing our children in facing their fears. Again, these are fears that are not inherently dangerous. So I don't need them to climb up to the top of a tall building. It's the things that they need or want to do. And try to, of course, post them on social media, which is so hard, but terribly important. What not to say with someone who has anxiety. So it's normal for us to kind of have these feelings or thoughts. You'll hear these in TV shows or past books. Quit being dramatic. Come on, it's easy. Pull yourself together. You're just being lazy. You need to toughen up. When are you going to grow up? You're crazy, or can't you just try harder? Instead, try one or none of these. If none of these fit with who you are, that's okay too. You can just listen. But I know this is hard for you. That's always a good one, and one that you can kind of just let them talk a little bit more. Take some time. It's okay. How can I help? What do you need right now? Want to talk about it? I see more than just your anxiety. This is what I love about you. Because like we said, anxious kids many times feel very, very negative about themselves. And so it's important for us to help cultivate that positive end. As we mentioned many times before, manage your over-involvement, create healthier boundaries of what you do for the kid, and employ the help that there is out there, whether it's a nurse, a principal, an aunt, whoever it is. You don't have to do it all. That's the main take home from this message or from this slide. Watch your own bandwidth, right? It's really important for us to understand that we need our own self-care. So going to those people that you need, whether counselors, pediatrician, religious figures, it's okay to go look for the help that you may need and support. And a whole lovely list that you can read on your own time of all the different things that can help you reduce your stress, even if it's 5 minutes a day. This is not that you have to go do yoga every day or join a new sports team. But if you like them, go for either of those. Breathing. This is for you as the parent and caregiver. Really important for you to watch what makes you happy, what helps you reduce stress. If it's playing chess, playing Wordle, whatever it might be. But having that support system, socialization, and something fun is important for all of us. So this is us. We see kids ages 8 to 17. We are federally funded, so this is at no cost to the individual, but we do have specific criteria because we are doing research protocols. So this is our number if anyone is interested in reaching out to us. We see kids and we provide, again, resources for treatment, whether it's medication or therapy. It's really the choice of the caregiver and the child. And then we also have an opportunity to participate in the research that we conduct. So I want to kind of end there to see if there's any specific questions that we can address.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berman. Everyone, you have now the ability to unmute yourself if you want to share out. You also still have access to the chat if you want to submit a question. And we have some that came in. So as you're thinking of your question, I'm going to raise a couple of things that came in. The first one is about finding like available help. Sometimes it might be hard to find a pediatrician that has the resources to support a child with anxiety. Is this what we see on the screen right now a good place to find help for a child who is anxious?
Yes, this is. And the number there is really, we will refer you to someone who will help you find those resources, whether it's social services, again, a nurse, someone in the school, but that's kind of what our job is to hear what you need, hear where you're located. As long as it's in the DC area, we're pretty good. We can help you outside, but whether it's Virginia, DC, or Maryland, and then we can point you in the right directions of resources that are out there that are either practitioners near you or also social services that might be close to you as well.
Thank you. I also want to highlight that if your child is in DC public schools, we have services to support. We have a universal referral system, and I'm putting some information now on the screen where you can find additional supports. Right now, also in the chat, I am entering a link where you can find the referral form for mental health for your child. So that is something that you as a parent of a DCPS student can submit. I know it's not in the most convenient way. And if you need help filling it out, feel free to reach out. I'm putting the email where you can find, if you can get support on the links and Instagram, like that's like managed by actually a social worker, that Instagram account. So you can get that information there. But if you want to email me and get support completing the form, I'm putting the email in the chat right now too. It's just parentu@k12.dc.gov, and I followed and I check that email account. All right, so let's take a couple of other questions. So we have a question that came in about how you can advocate for your child in school. Like, what are some things that you can ask for from your school, from your teachers, especially if your child is like introverted and has internalized anxiety?
Okay. Well, that question is very important. And it, to me, from my experience in this area, is it does depend a bit on the school. You know, your child with anxiety does qualify for IEPs many times, which is an individual education plan. And some kids will even be able to apply for 504s. Usually you would go through your school counselor. That's probably the best route to go of what you need to do to be able to document this, because a lot of times kids with anxiety need accommodations. For example, you may have a child who's nervous to speak in front of the class. You don't have to make them do that. There's many things that teachers can do to assess a child to help them build up their strength and not have to always just jump right in. So I hope that that's just kind of a really quick answer. And then if anyone else has any more that they have to share that's worked in their schools, that's, I think, always helpful too.
Another question that we have is, so you talked about what to watch out for when a child is suffering from anxiety. Usually this is a specific question. It says, my child gets really anxious when we start talking to him about grades, and we need to talk about grades. So how do I address that discussion without triggering the anxiety?
Yes. So one, I would say there's 3 different ways to approach it. One, you have to always watch your timing, right? Doing it when they come home from school may not work. It may be better on making this up Saturday morning, right? 2, self-disclosure can be helpful. If you know any other peer that may be struggling with this, or you as a parent maybe had that happen, letting them know, really normalizing it some way can be helpful to get them to talk about it more, because most anxious kids feel like they're the only ones with this problem. And then also if they really don't want to talk about it, there's many books or shows, or I would recommend talking to a school counselor or school psychologist that they can read first, and then may be able to help them articulate what they're worried about. Do you know?
Thank you. So on a similar topic, you had a slide that mentioned focusing on like the physical aspects of anxiety when the child is experiencing anxiety. But as a parent, I really need my child to listen and to communicate with me. So what does that look like? How long after I try the physical strategies can I try to talk to my child about what just happened?
You as a parent are the expert on them. I think you can get a sense when they might be a little calmer, do you know? So for some kids, it can be 5 minutes. For others, it might be 30. The other thing is when they're calm, and this is many times hard to do, but let's say, you know, this is a struggle you normally have, sitting down with them on a time where they're more calm. It's kind of the, you know, beauty of therapy, but therapy, you don't need to be a therapist to do it. You just need a quiet space. Hey, I notice, you know, when I'm trying to get you to calm down, right? You're not making eye contact. Can we make that a commitment maybe? That when I will make sure that we're making eye contact, and that might help. Coming up with a strategy when they're calm to handle those moments is kind of, you know, another way to go.
So we talked about children and adolescents in general, but how do I know what emotional changes that adolescents are going through is like adolescence, and what is actually like the worry and anxiety that, because those like teenagers are just emotions. So how and when do I know that my teenager is not just being a teenager?
Yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant question. I mean, I had many sessions like that today where they were talking about just normal for lack of a better word, drama at school between girls, or, what is it something to be concerned about, and you need to address it. Because it is, even back to that first slide with the images of the frontal lobe, yes, teenage years are emotional. And one day they can be feeling great, and the next day they could be looking very depressed, right? So when do we get concerned? When it's consistent, when it's many days in a row. But most important that I look for is, when is it interfering in their life or your life, in terms of, yes, it's taking you 2 hours to get them out the door, or they're complaining about this individual every day. Maybe that person is bullying them. Looking for, again, repeated, consistent problems, because yes, there's normal emotions and ups and downs of teenage times, but is it interfering in them and their happiness as kids?
Thank you. I'm going to go back a couple of slides. Is this a study only for children and adolescents who are in the DC area, or someone from perhaps like another city like Chicago could participate remotely?
So this, for our study, there are other studies at the National Institute of Mental Health that might be more broad. Ours is only in the DC local area here. So that's why we're more experts for resources in the DC local area or participation in the DC local area.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so we're getting close to our end time. I am going to throw a couple of polls on the screen. Let me start with a feedback from our participants. We offer this workshops and sessions for families, and we want to make sure that we're providing you something that is value for you. We took your feedback from the fall to adapt it for the spring. So if you were joining us, if you joined us in the fall, you'll see there's some things that are different. So I'm launching that poll right now. Please give us your feedback. And while folks complete that, let's touch on a couple more questions that are coming in. All right, so one more question that came in is, when children become fixated with things, is this part of anxiety? Like, for example, a child who becomes fixated with like cursing. And is this normal? Is this something to be worried about? This is not like a teenager. This is more like like a child who might be in 4th or 5th grade.
Mm-hmm. Well, and honestly, when anything new pops up, it's important to pay attention to. So if they all of a sudden become fixated on cursing, that could be, again, either something novel and they're testing it out. So also we have, as some of the last question was very important, as they get older, they're testing boundaries too, correct? So, are they just testing your reaction? Can it also be a source of anxiety? Sure, for sure. Anything that gets repetitive and is excessive could be a sign of anxiety as well. And with those types of things, it's really important for us to focus on what can we help the kid do in the moment that will help them cope. So maybe they're just saying that to cope or to calm down. We don't want to judge. When you're in 4th and 5th grade, we use all kinds of different skills,
Thank you. I'm going to launch another survey just to know where folks are joining us from, what ward, and like the grade band of your child. We do have some people in the audience who have like younger children, like, 3rd grade and below. And the question is, how do I support my child who has spent a big chunk of their school experience remotely? Like, how do I help them how do I help them cope with the isolation effects from the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was even speaking to an occupational therapist a couple of weeks ago about these young kids, how even the kindergartners are having delays in just their finger strength because they didn't unzip and zip a backpack, or they're like the 2nd and 3rd graders over and over again for, a couple years. So I think the best thing that we can do is look at where they may be having issues. And if even we're not aware, just being able to say, more specifically with the isolation and the social isolation, giving them more chances to practice. I mean, that's just in general. So if we're seeing them having difficulties making friends or knowing how to say hi, or even as I said, my kids don't even remember to say hi to the assistant principal, that's okay, normal, but I need to support them and remind them in a kind way. So, you know, there's so many things that kids have fallen behind with right now, and being aware as a parent and hopefully helping them practice, because what the cool thing about kids is their brains are really plastic, and with a little extra practice, you know, they'll rebound quite well.
And we have one last question, and that is how do we support or find specific therapies that could be effective for children who are experiencing anxiety, but who also have autism or anything else.
Right.
Specifically autism, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very common for many different symptoms to go together, correct? Like whether you have a learning disability can cause anxiety, being on the spectrum can also be a component with anxiety. And there are many, again, I would refer always, your school is maybe a good resource to help you come up with professionals that can help. We are as well. And it really depends on the child and the diagnosis of what therapy works the best for them. You know, I do feel it's very individual. We do know behavioral therapy in general, different versions of it can be very helpful for children with on the spectrum, and also for anxiety and even other things like attention deficit disorder as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So on the screen, we have where to find support with this. If someone is joining us from a different part in the a different area, can they find similar supports in other cities?
Yes, for sure. And then even many of the websites, or I know there's lots of national numbers at the National Institute of Mental Health website, national numbers, and also websites for just kind of a clearinghouse to find those resources. So yes.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We are a little bit over time, but I do want to make sure that we continue this conversation. If you joined us a little late, you can find a full recording to this session on our YouTube channel. You can also find more information on our social media platforms that are on the screen. If you want to communicate with the family engagement team here at DCPS, you could just send us a message on social media. I check those. I'll answer them. You'll hear from me. So please feel free to engage with us on that. We have a couple of other sessions that are coming up. We have a session next week on specifically for high school students or 8th grade students too, who receive specialized instruction. At DCPS, students who receive specialized instruction begin planning for their post-secondary transition at the age of 13. So if you're interested in that session, please do join us. We'll take a break for spring break, but we'll be back on the 19th with summer learning. There's a lot of stuff going on. If you missed the DCPS summer learning program deadlines, we will have community partners coming in and providing information about what else is going on across the city that you and your child can participate to continue learning in the summer. And then on the 26th, we have a session around assessments